Hello. So apparently, I don't know how to stream properly yet, but that's okay. You know, we'll survive. Hi everyone. Okay. So, um, today we're talking about the wrapper, um, general HTML structure, and how the wrapper and various um, HTML templates and embedded web pages sort of work together. So, if you have any questions, feel free to put them either in the Twitch chat or in um, the Discord uh, channel. Let me just. I think I forgot to open that up. There we go. Alright. So I've just opened up the channel in Discord. It's called Tutorial Stream Chat. If you type a question in there, I will also see it during the stream. And I apologize if I don't get to questions immediately. I only have one monitor at the moment, so I also apologize if any kind of spam or anything gets through that, you know, I don't hit moderate on fast enough. But HTML. Oh, so in terms of tools that I use, I will be using Visual Studio Code today, and always. Visual Studio Code is a free piece of software, not Visual Studio Community, which is also free, but does something completely different. I don't know why Microsoft insists on naming everything the same thing. Visual Studio Code, when I'm doing HTML, for the most part, I use it for syntax highlighting. It just makes the code easier to read. Jcink does have a built-in syntax highlighter as well. If we pull up the admin panel, oh bother. Hang on a sec, guys. My ability to be prepared for things is not particularly. Anyway, so here's VS Code. Jcink also has syntax highlighting now, which is great. You can totally use that if those particular colors work for you and you don't want to download another piece of software or whatever. VS Code has two things that for HTML editing I really use a lot. One is you can customize which colors it uses for your syntax highlighting. It's got several modes sort of built in. It's got both light and dark modes built in, and it also actually you can straight up customize the colors that it uses. The other thing is right click, format document. This is my favorite command in all of everywhere. So what I have here is the literally simplest board wrapper you could possibly have. When I get around to posting VODs and resources and everything, I will get this as a snippet that you can copy in the resources area. So, first line, doctype HTML. Doctype tells the browser what the heck you're talking about. And you would think that the next tag, the HTML tag, would tell it that it's HTML, but actually the doctype HTML does speed up the processing of the page, which reduces screen flash at the very start of your page load. Which screen flash is that plain white screen that shows up before your page loads, and it's really annoying. And it is especially annoying if you're in dark mode. If you have a dark theme or someone has chosen a dark theme specifically because they don't want the bright white shining in their face, and your screen flashes white every frickin' page load, let me tell you, it's annoying. If you can avoid that, it's better. But the doc type is important because there are, in fact, multiple kinds of HTML. So if you don't have a doc type on your page, the browser will read the entirety of your HTML and try and figure out which variety of HTML you are using. Whether it is sort of bog standard, most recent variety of HTML, whether it is XHTML, whether it is HTML 2.0, HTML transitional, XHTML transitional. So this doc type HTML tells it, just HTML. Current modern HTML. If anything doesn't look like current modern HTML, it's an error. And do your best to figure out what I mean, but it is not a sign that this is some weird variety of HTML. This is especially important if you have errors in your HTML. Because some browsers, when they are trying to figure out what you meant instead of what you said, because what you said makes no sense, some browsers will guess differently than other browsers, and then you end up with weird, hey, this looks right in Firefox, but it doesn't look right in Chrome, and it looks really wrong in like Safari for mobile on an older phone, but not a newer phone. What the heck is going on? Some of those errors are due to you using the particular CSS rule that not every browser has implemented correctly. They're straight up browser bugs. Some of them may be due to the resolution being differently, and the computer tries to do math because you've got mixed up. You're specifying pixels some places and percentages elsewhere, but and so there's rounding errors if it's just like little positioning things. The fewer errors you have in your HTML, the less guesswork the browser has to do. Sometimes it's you've used something really, really, really modern that's still in draft spec, and some browsers will implement draft spec and some of them won't. But I do have a previous video that I will be bringing up as a VOD sometime next week about how to debug your HTML, and I may cover the topic in the future again. But for right now, for today, we're just going to look at what kind of, how to do it correctly, rather than debugging it once you realize you've made a mistake. So then after the doc type, we get into uh, your actual tags. And almost all tags are have an opening tag and a closing tag. And that represents a thing that has content inside it. And um, you want to make sure that your tags are all nested correctly. Um, for example, if you are formatting text, the most common sort of improper nesting that everybody does because it doesn't actually make a difference is things like you tell it to start making text bold, and then you tell it to start making text italics, and then you tell it to stop making text bold, and then you tell it to stop making text italics, right? So your bold area of text doesn't completely surround your italics area of text, but the browser figures it out. And if you actually look in developer tools, which tells you what the browser has interpreted your HTML as rather than what the raw HTML is, you'll see that it's put in some extra open closing tags. So it says there's a bold section, and inside the bold section there's an italic section with an open tag and a closed tag, and then the bold tag. And then we're going to start another italic section after the bold tag closes and do just italics for the next piece of text. So the browser will try and figure out what you meant. And for things like text formatting, it works pretty well. Browser's almost always good at figuring out what you meant instead of what you said. When it's things like div tags and especially body and head tags and things, it can get weird. Because if you have boxes of different types that aren't nested properly, you end up with what you thought was one tag ending up with multiple boxes on your page. Incorrectly nesting div tags directly inside table tags instead of inside table cells is the most common one. If you have a bunch of table rows and then a div and then a bunch more table rows, that content in the div, usually this is when this happens in Jcink a lot, when your macro and your template don't quite line up with each other in terms of what style of layout you're wanting that page to be. You'll end up with the line that says regular topics above your announcements and your pinned topics instead of between your announcements and your regular topics. And you look in your page source and it looks right, the things are in the right order, but it's not being displayed in the right order. And that's because your div tag was inside of a table, which it's not allowed. So the browser's like, okay, well, we'll put it in the closest spot that it is allowed to be in. Things like that, you get some weird errors. But for so going back to basic HTML structure, so your HTML element here is also your root element. So in your style sheet, if you say HTML or if you say :root, those are the same things. Those are both referring to this HTML element. In regular HTML. In some weird varieties of HTML, if your browser is set to compatibility mode, which is your Edge browser or your newest version of Internet Explorer is mimicking super old versions of Internet Explorer, including all of their bugs, for websites that were designed for that earlier version. Um, the HTML element and the root element are not the same thing. It gets weird. Old Internet Explorer was the bane of my existence. I'm glad it doesn't exist anymore. Uh, and that doc type HTML at the top will prevent the browser from thinking that your HTML errors mean that it's a really old website and it should be trying to mimic the bugs that were in the really old website, which is just going to make everything worse. So your root HTML element, literally everything except the doc type, should be inside that HTML element. That HTML element is basically, you can think of it as the browser itself. And there should only be two things inside your HTML element, which are your head element and your body element. Your head element contains all of the information about the page. It contains the page title that should show up in your as the name of your tab or your bookmark. It contains your main style sheets. You can put style tags elsewhere on the page. The browser will handle it just fine. It's technically, according to the HTML specification, not correct. But that's one of those things that you have to do sometimes because of the way Jcink templates work. Because we want to put specific styles that only apply to specific pages or specific templates, even though those templates are using like the same elements as somewhere else on your site, whatever. So we do put styles elsewhere on the page. But if you're going to put styles in your wrapper, put them in the head. Your JavaScript tag, there is the built-in Jcink JavaScript tag includes a couple of JavaScript files that are unique to Jcink that are required to make Jcink work. For example, the JavaScript that makes the quick edit work, the JavaScript that makes I think the alerts pop-up work properly, the JavaScript that makes the buttons and the edit mode work properly, that kind of thing. And it also includes a link to a very old version of jQuery. And I asked John about that, and he will not update the version of jQuery that's in that JavaScript tag because he doesn't want to break old websites, which is fair. If you need a newer version of jQuery, I do have the contents of that JavaScript tag, which is not a required tag in your page. So you can replace that JavaScript tag with sort of the block of Jcink specific JavaScript and a link to the newer JavaScript framework, or the newer jQuery framework. Or you can put that JavaScript tag and the link to the newer version of jQuery like immediately under it, and it will overwrite the first link to jQuery. However, if you have multiple links to the jQuery framework that are different versions, it can cause some weird bugs every once in a while. Especially if the second link to jQuery is further down on the page. Like there's the built-in link to jQuery, and then there's some JavaScript, and then there's a different link to jQuery. I've seen it do some weird things. It may or may not cause problems. So I will provide that sort of alternate JavaScript chunk in the resources as well when I get around to loading up all my resources. So and then the other thing, the other things that belong in the head section um, are, of course, um, basically everything that the website needs in order to display correctly, but not anything that you want it actually displayed. So links to web fonts, links to external JavaScript frameworks, um, links to external CSS files, any other meta tags. I can provide a list of recommended meta tags as well. If you have a responsive website that is good at, your actual skin is good at lower resolutions without switching to Jcynk's mobile mode, you can tell the browser that. Um, if you're and the browser will try and figure it out on its own, but telling it whether or not there's a minimum width for your website in order for the skin to look appropriate. The more you tell the browser and the less it has to guess, the better, basically. There are meta tags for if you link it in Discord and have the embed pop up, what do you want that embed to look like? That sort of thing. You may also have some JavaScript files or some JavaScript, like actual embedded codes that the person who wrote the code specifically tells you to put in the head section. Those go sort of right before this closing head tag. Then you have your body tag. And there are, actually I'm going to change this slightly. There are a bunch of classes. So you can give your body tag an ID. You can give your body tag classes. That these let your pages look. They let you customize your styles based on which page you're on. That's this little boy here. Input act will tell you which Jcink page you're on. So this class will change based on whether you're, looking at a thread list or looking at a thread itself or in the store or on the index page or in the control panel, that sort of thing. GID, you can create a class based on the group ID. All the variables that are available in the documentation as global variables are actually not global. They're wrapper variables. There's a few places in the Jcink documentation where things are mislabeled or not quite right because that particular documentation page is really old and things have slightly changed since then. But for the most part, once you've figured out sort of the oddities in the language that the documentation is, it's a pretty good resource. And it should kind of be your first resource if you're trying to look to do something. And if you can't find it there, then start asking questions, of course. But so any of the user-specific variables that go into your wrapper will refer to the logged-in user. So you can give your body a class based on the user's group, the actual user ID. Don't know why you'd do that, but whatever. You can. The whether or not the user is a mod, whether or not the user has access to admin CP. I like those two. I tend to not attach those two to the body class. I tend to attach those to whichever specific element I want to hide or show based on whether the user is a mod. Um, uh, so some skins will use this act class as an ID, this act string as an ID rather than a class. That's fine. You just have to pay attention to whether your styles should use uh, the period or the hashtag when you're referring to this. Some of my skins, this class list gets really long. Act, code, logged in users group. So code is like which section of the control panel they're in, or which particular page of the store they're in, that sort of thing. Specific forum ID. So you can style, I will style my forums a little bit differently based on whether it's an in-game forum or an out-of-game forum, right? So rather than setting forum-specific skin, which prevents the user from picking a skin that they want, then in those forums, I will set I'll just give it a class based on the forum that they're in, and that way, the forum list can have a different background color based on whether it's in-character forum or not, for example. Some of my sites, I go a little bit more crazy with that. In my sidebar, I'll show the getting started quick links if you're in the out of character sections, and I'll show the links to like the map, things like that if you're in the in character sections. Whatever, however fancy you want to go. So that's the body tag. This is also like if you want a toggleable light dark mode, that'll end up being something in the body tag. It may be a data element, it may be a class that you're toggling with JavaScript. So those classes go right here. Your anything that's going to affect the body tag itself needs to go directly after the body tag. JavaScript cannot act on anything that does not already exist on the page. So if you want to affect the class or the data element of the body tag, to tell it whether to be in light or dark mode, and you wait until the entire page is loaded, you're going to get screen flash. It's going to, if I pick dark mode and the default is light mode, it's going to load up the entire page in light mode and then get to the end of it, see that it's supposed to be in dark mode, and then change it. Again, annoying. So if you set whether or not it should be light mode before anything else on the page loads, then you're good. You've already got your styles, so it knows what background color to put in dark mode, it's created the page and immediately picks whether or not you're in light mode or dark mode. Anything that is going to affect other elements on the page, you put it here, it won't work properly. There are ways to create a script and then tell that script to not run until the end of the page. That's when you start getting into some of my JavaScript tutorials, but for the most part, we're going to not worry about that for right now. Then you're going to have a bunch of skin-specific HTML, obviously, throughout your wrapper. The things that you need to include in your wrapper are your board header, your navigation, the board itself, which is where it's just basically your everything else category, and then the copyright. The wrapper will not save unless you have those in the wrapper. So the board variable is where you're going to find, it's going to load up whichever HTML templates are appropriate. It's going to load up whatever built-in HTML is appropriate for that page. So editing all of that sort of main content of the page is going to be done outside of your wrapper. And the copyright notice obviously is required. If you want to put the copyright at these don't necessarily have to be in this order. If you want to put the copyright right at the top of your page, go ahead. Looks kind of weird. It's up to you. Some people like putting it in like the sidebar or something rather than right down at the bottom. Like on my portfolio site, you might notice that it's in sort of the left-hand side page of the site with, the coffee link and the chat box and everything. So in my case, like the copyright's actually buried somewhere above the board tag. But those four just have to be there. And then optionally, you have the shout box, you have the built-in affiliate system, and you have any HTML pages that you are using as custom HTML templates for your wrapper rather than actual standalone web pages. If you navigate to a page, that page HTML content will end up stuffed into where the board tag is, but you can also embed web pages. Like if you have a news box that you edit every couple months, you don't want to keep digging through a ginormous wrapper page to edit that. You can pull that out, put it in a custom HTML page, custom web page, and then embed it in your wrapper. And then the majority of your JavaScript, the majority of your custom codes are going to go at the bottom of your page. Two reasons for this. One, like I said, JavaScript can only act on things that already exist on your page. JavaScript runs once. It is not declarative. So what I mean by that is, like CSS, if you have a CSS rule, it applies to everything all the time. If you create a new element, like if your JavaScript creates a new element or gives an element a different class, and there's a CSS rule about that class, it will change what that element looks like. If you give an element a style directly with JavaScript, and then another piece of JavaScript um, creates another element, or destroys that element and recreates it with the same class, the same everything, but you applied the styles with JavaScript, the new element will not get those same styles. If you tell it with JavaScript to, you know, uh, change the order of the navigation elements, but the navigation bar hasn't loaded yet, it won't do anything. When the navigation bar does load, it won't do anything. That JavaScript has run. It runs once, it stops. A JavaScript follows instructions in order, and once that instruction is completed, it doesn't do it anymore. Asynchronous JavaScript acts out of order. That's an advanced JavaScript topic. We'll get into that. And there are ways of telling JavaScript, hang on, wait. I'm telling you what to do at the top of the page, but you're going to wait and run it at the bottom. It's still only going to run once. Things might get a little bit out of order, which is why it's an advanced topic. Understanding what order it is going to run in is a bit complicated, but it runs in order once you understand that logic, and it only runs once. So for the most part, you want your JavaScript to run at the end. The other reason you want your JavaScript to run at the end is to speed up the page load. While the JavaScript is running, nothing else is happening. So if you have JavaScript that's like right after the board, that's going to affect, you've got JavaScript that takes out that comma. They do have a macro for that now, but that takes out that comma right before the board description, between the title and the description. Everyone has the JavaScript for that, basically. Just about every board that I've seen. If you put that right under that board, that's okay. While that's running, which takes like 2 nanoseconds, nobody's going to notice, but still, technically, while that's running, the copyright is not loading on the page. If you put it at the very bottom, it won't run until after the copyright is loaded, which again, only takes a couple fractions of a second. Nobody's going to notice. It's faster than the refresh rate on your browser even, let alone actual human noticing that something's changed on the page. But, for example, if you put that JavaScript to remove the comma from the title after a bunch of other scripts that do take several seconds to finish running, you're going to see that comma until everything else is finished running, and then it's going to be taken out. So what order you put your JavaScript in will make a difference in terms of how fast your page loads, how fast your page appears to load, and whether you have any sort of jumping around, visual jumping around as the JavaScript changes elements on your page. So some scripts will tell you specifically, put this right under your board tag. Some scripts will say, put it under your copyright tag. At that point, if anything tells you to put JavaScript at the bottom of your wrapper after the copyright tag, they mean in this chunk of custom JavaScript right before /body. I have seen people take bottom of your wrapper very literally and put it under the last HTML tag. This is incorrect. It will generally run. Most browsers will figure out what you meant, but it should be before the /body. The closer you get to being spot on to HTML specification, the less extra processing the browser has to do to figure out what you meant as opposed to what you said, which means everything runs faster and there's fewer chances for the browser to make mistakes. Um, Particularly mobile browsers um, tend to make more mistakes. They have less memory to run on, um, and just because it's not a giant powerful computer, they have less storage space to store their code, so their sort of error correction for figuring out what a mistake in your HTML code actually was intended to mean is just less advanced. And especially some of the less popular browsers that are specifically marketing themselves as, faster, leaner, no bloat kinds of browsers, the error correction for guessing what you meant when you have non-spec code is terrible. So that's your wrapper. Board header is completely Jcink controlled. Navigation, completely Jcink controlled. Once it's loaded, there's a couple things you can do with JavaScript, but there's no templates associated with it. Same with the copyright. The board is your main content. And again, you're getting into so that's your HTML templates. You want to make sure that you are using correct HTML, that you're using proper wrapping and everything. And then are you kidding me? Okay, anyways. I'm going to have to take a brief intermission in a minute here. But yeah, so everything that's in the HTML templates is going to get inside that board tag, is going to expand into all of that stuff. So we're going to get into that in a second. The one thing that I want to mention to keep in mind as we start looking at the templates is the browser and the browser specifications and the HTML specifications that you're trying to validate your code against apply to the entire web page. So after everything's been expanded out. So for example, ID attributes need to be unique on the entire page. I've seen people interpret that as per web page, like they'll have multiple embedded web pages in their wrapper, and they're like, but it is unique, per web page, but those web pages are the Jcink web pages. Multiple of those are being embedded in the same actual page that the browser is receiving. The browser has no indication that they've come from different sources after they've all been mashed together. Having multiple IDs on a page is not intuitively obvious that they need to be unique, because your styles don't care. Styles are not declarative. Styles apply globally all the time, no matter what changes on the page. So if you have multiple elements on the page that all have the same ID, and you have a style rule that says, hey, if an element has this ID, it should be red. I don't know. Um, they'll all be red. Looks fine. As soon as you start trying to manipulate that element with JavaScript, you say, hey, JavaScript, I want um, the all, I want elements with this ID to be um, you know, add some extra text after it. I don't know, whatever. Um, it will find the first one. It will go, I found one. IDs are unique. There's no point keeping looking because I know that there's only one on the page because that's what the rule says. It'll affect the first one. It'll stop. Rule's done. Job done. Going home. Um, I see this really commonly on like post row templates. People using IDs. Never use IDs in anything that repeats unless it is specifically the post ID. You can have an ID on your post row template that includes the post ID because you know that that's going to be unique on the entire page that the browser gets. Don't use ID equals mini profile. Your JavaScript will not thank you. We'll get into that again a little bit as we dig into the templates itself. But just remember that this page, after everything's been substituted out, is what the browser is getting, and any rules about HTML need to apply to the entire thing as a whole. Don't try and so when you're working in the HTML templates, remember that you are working on a piece of the page. You need to keep in mind the entire thing. So yeah, I need to take a quick 5 minute break or something. So we'll be back in a few to talk about individual HTML templates and how to get web pages to play nicely together or with your wrapper. Just double check for questions before we move to intermission. No? Okay. I'll see you in probably about 5 minutes.